The bright orange candelabra of Montbretia are one of the loveliest flowers of the autumn. Familiar to most people probably from one or other of the more flamboyant varieties that you see in gardens. But just like fuchsia, it grows profusely in the wild, in the west of Ireland, and here in Slieve Bloom around old farmsteads, by the side of the road, and along the rivers and streams of the mountains. Montbretia is a hybrid, developed in France in the late 1870s between two species of Crocosmia. Now, Crocosmia is a small genus in the iris family, of which we have very few wild representatives in Offaly. In fact, yellow flag is probably the only common wild member of the iris family. And it is a typical monocotyledon. Just to refresh our memories, the monocotyledons, or the monocots, are one of the two major divisions into which the flowering plants are divided, characterized, among many other things, but most obviously, by the sword-like leaves, by the way in which the parts of the flower are in multiples of three, and the way in which there's no clear distinction between sepals and petals, for which reason the term tepal is sometimes used to describe the coloured parts of it. And I like to think that Montbretia carries, in its genetic makeup, carries an ecological echo of its ancestral home by stream sides in the mountains of East and South Africa. A habitat very similar to where it's growing so profusely here along the Camcaw River in Slieve Bloom, upstream from Kinnetty Castle. The flowers are slightly but importantly zygomorphic, or bilaterally symmetrical. There are three outer tepals, more or less all the same, but the upper of the three inner tepals acts as an awning over the stamens and the pistil. At the base of each of the other inner tepals and the bottom outer tepal are two small red splashes that act as nectar guides. You can see the way the three stamens are at the top of the flower, above the opening to the nectar tube, and they dehisce downward. Notice the way the style projects forward in front of the anthers and the rather elaborate way the trifid stigma flares out. Does this remind you of another flower we looked at earlier in the autumn? It shares several of these characteristics with fuchsia, because Montbretia is another ornithophilous flower adapted for bird visitors, but in this case the intended visitors are African sunbirds. The curve of the lower part of the corolla tube matches the curving beak of its lost sunbird pollinators. The characteristic flattening of the inflorescence is probably a concession to its pollinators, because unlike the hummingbirds that pollinate fuchsia in its native South America, for example, sunbirds can't hover. So they need to be able to perch in order to probe for the nectar. And this flattening arrangement probably facilitates their ability to maneuver. The forgotten young Frenchman who accompanied Napoleon's Egyptian expedition as its official botanist in 1798 and died there of the plague at the age of 21 could never have in his wildest dreams imagined that his name will be forever remembered in the popular name of this flower, given to it 20 years after his death. Antoine François Ernest Coquebert de Montbray was the young man. The name Montbretia, his lasting memorial.